Hello everyone, and welcome to Tech2's podcast, The Earth, Space, and the Human Race. I'm Abigail, and she's Kavya. And in our second episode, we're going to be talking to two experts, a space engineer and an entrepreneur, and a space lawyer, about the most recent development in the Indian space sector, InSPACe.
So, InSPACe is a new organization that was announced in June this year, but it's been in the works for a long time now. It's a space organization under the government that's exclusively meant to represent the interests of the private space sector in India. It also gives space businesses a seat on the table to help shape the Indian space program. And many are calling it a historic new addition to the space sector. So, joining us today to dive a little deeper and find out just how big a deal this is and how it could help Indian space sector and space businesses in India, we have with us Yashas Karanam, who's the co-founder of Bellatrix Aerospace. We also have Ashok GV here. He's a space lawyer at Factum Law. How are
Hi.
you guys doing?
Very well.
Great. Thanks for calling us around. I think this is a great topic to talk about.
So Yashas, with Bellatrix now working on Chetak, and we're going to be seeing it launching off very soon. What else is Bellatrix working on? Can you tell us something about it?
Yeah, sure. So Bellatrix Aerospace is mainly a in-space propulsion systems company. We are also working on Chetak. So when I say in-space propulsion, what it means is all satellites that go up to space. Their rocket's job is to take a satellite to a particular orbit called parking orbit, somewhere around 400 to 550 kilometers in space. And from there, it ejects the satellite and comes back. And after that, satellite needs its own propulsion system or engine, which is like on the satellite. And this engine's job is to maintain the position of the satellite as per the required altitude, and also to increase the orbit. Say, for example, satellite is launched at 500, it wants to go to 800. It can use this propulsion system to go higher in the in orbit. And this is one. And second thing, on Chetak, Bellatrix has primarily been working on the engine part for Chetak, and on the entire launch vehicle we have teams working on it, but it will take few more years before I think we'll see the first launch of Chetak. And in terms of propulsion systems, we have been working on 4 different variants of propulsion systems for satellites, just to cater to the entire class of satellites, from very small satellites all the way up to huge 6-ton class satellites. That's Bellatrix for you.
Thanks, Yashas. And a lot of people in India are now surprised to hear, Ashok, that there are dedicated reporters that even cover science. Can only imagine how niche they think space law is. So how did you get into space law? And are there any particularly cool things you've worked on that you can share with us over the years?
Okay, so space law was a pure transition by accident, so to say. I am a commercial disputes counsel based out of Bangalore, so I deal with mostly earthly subjects for the most part. Just so happens that one of my clients was looking to become a private satellite operator. And during that time of advising them on some of their requirements, I happened to chance across the SATCOM policy, the technology transfer policy of the ISRO, the remote sensing data policy. So, and I also realized in the course of some of the conferences that I attended that I felt incredibly ignorant when everybody else is discussing space policy and I did not know what it was. So I decided, okay, I must learn the subject, and published a couple of papers on what India's commercial space policy should look like. And that's pretty much how my transition into space law started. And though it sounds incredibly cool and very, very exciting, for the most part, we deal with things like satellite communication regulations. Is the right orbit available for the satellite? Is the satellite able to access the spectrum and the frequency necessary to communicate with the ground station? So I think space law is also an offset of your conventional technology and telecommunication law as well.
Yashas, with InSPACe in the picture, does that will that mean that ISRO and other private players will be like on an equal footing? Will there be like a clear distinction between what ISRO is going to be working on and what other private players are going to be working on in space?
Right now, I think, as you're aware, ISRO has been the primary agency in India which has been working on various space technologies, may it be launching satellites, launching rockets, or providing services on ground. But in the last 4 5 years, right, maybe starting from 2014, 2015, there have been a number of private companies coming slowly, which are developing capabilities in these areas. There are several companies which wants to build their own constellations of small satellites, and some companies which wants to be satellite manufacturers, some companies which want to be launch vehicle service providers. But in India, there was no policy as such which would enable such companies to operate. For example, if I decide to send my own rocket from India, I'm not sure if there would be any legal consequences on me if I go and randomly launch it. So basically, I can't do it, right? There are a lot of rules, regulations to be followed. So there had to be somebody who had to set this up and allow private companies to do it. And all these days, it was not very relevant because there were very few players, maybe 3 to 4 players in the private sector. But right now, since last 2 years, there have been more than 20 private companies which are working on various areas. And it's about time India needs something like this. This is where InSPACe comes into picture. Now, the government wants to support companies like us, which are working on our own products. Previously, you would say there were many companies working with ISRO, right? But most of those companies have been manufacturing systems for ISRO. Say ISRO is launching the PSLV, there could be larger groups which are manufacturing very critical systems, or most of PSLV, about 80%, is manufactured by industry. But handling the entire mission is still done by ISRO. Now with InSPACe, I think they are going to up the game for private companies, where we'll be having a complete set of guidelines on how this is going to be opened up for private companies. That will be one of the key responsibilities that InSPACe is going to be pulling out. And also it would act as an independent regulator, as in there needs to be a regulator which is neutral and central, and which can probably understand both the queries of private companies and ISRO, and probably act as a bridge and try to give a very good policy which would enable private companies to coexist with ISRO. I think that is what InSPACe is going to do. And with that in mind, I think it is going to be a very good thumbs up for the private companies, because all these days we had nothing. Now we have a great hope in the form of InSPACe. Currently, out of the $400 billion space industry, India is only at 3% of market share, despite being one of the major space powers. I think with this, we should easily target 10% of this global industry, which, if you convert to rupees, it's going to be a huge 7.6 lakh crores. I was just calculating that amount. So I think that potential lies within space.
Ashok, what does this mean, the setup of InSPACe itself? What does this mean for funding for space startups in India? Is it still, maybe you can give us a little bit of a picture of what it was like before, and what kind of, will there be a mix of both government funding for private projects as well as investment driven funding? Can you give us a picture of what it'll be like now as well?
So again, just to kind of expand on the problem statement that Yashas had identified. See, prior to the regime of InSPACe being announced, if I am an investor looking to invest in, say, a space startup in the country, I want to know what my return on investment is going to be and how much of protection my investment is going to get under the domestic laws of the country. So if I'm going to invest in a space company, and tomorrow the space company has to apply for permission from the Indian government to launch a satellite into space, the question is, what is the policy framework that governs the whole process of giving this permission to a private entity to launch a satellite? Now there, unfortunately, we always had a tremendous amount of uncertainties built into the process. So the application for seeking permission to launch would be filed before a committee called the CAISS under the SATCOM policy, which is a multidisciplinary body of the government of India. Now, the policy does not tell me what are the parameters based on which my application will be adjudicated, and on what parameters will I be judged as to whether I'll get permission or not. So there is the uncertainty on what is it that I need to do to convince the government to give me permission. Now, the second problem is that even if I keep the uncertainty on the outcome aside, the mere possibility that between all these various departments, the time taken for me to get an answer on my application itself was very uncertain. I don't know whether it's going to take 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. So that problem was the second reason why I think the earlier policy did not work. Now this is at the domestic level. Once I clear my hurdles domestically, I need to then coordinate through the Indian government with the International Telecommunication Union to ensure that I get the orbital slot where I can put my satellite, and also then get access to the frequency or the spectrum with which I can speak to my satellite. So the uncertainty in the domestic level aggravates the complications and the difficulties of getting the orbital slot and the spectrum at the international level. Now, because of this, though the SATCOM sector was always open to a very liberal foreign direct investment regime, space startups in India could not really leverage that to raise a lot of funding, because the business model is so muddled by the regulatory uncertainties. An investor would probably not be very confident in putting money into a space startup because you just don't know whether the startup will be able to achieve its objective of putting something in space.
How about now that InSPACe is actually set up? What is it looking like for startups now? Will this make it easier for them to kind of seek more funding? Is there still a lot of like red tape that makes it difficult on the international front to seek approval? How does that work now?
So, see, I mean, more than the brand of InSPACe, as a lawyer, what I really want to see is the legislation around InSPACe, because the legislation tell us who the composition of InSPACe is going to be, what are the functions of InSPACe, what are the powers of InSPACe, what are the responsibilities of InSPACe, what are the mandates in terms of time frame for adjudicating applications. So the policy will tell us how effective and how beneficial InSPACe will be for the private sector in the country. But if I have to really speculate and assume that the government is really going to carry through its intention of bringing out a policy that reflects the bold vision, then InSPACe should ideally be an autonomous institution, which means that it's independent of any conflict of interest with ISRO, which is also a competitor in the space industry in India. So first question for me is there the effort made to address the conflict of interest for this new regulatory body? And second, will InSPACe be able to consolidate and aggregate the functions of the multiple departments and regulators that are currently involved? Just to give you an example, if I have to launch a satellite with telecommunication application, today I have to get the equipment certified by the Telecom Engineering Center. The network created by my equipment has to be certified by the NOCC. Then the wireless planning and coordination wing I'll have to work with to get spectrum and access to the orbit. And after all of that, I need to ensure that there is an NOC from the Department of Space so that they don't object to my satellite mission. I mean, essentially, the hope is that InSPACe will somewhere be able to consolidate and aggregate the functions of these multiple stakeholders involved in the ecosystem. And last but not the least, obviously, if I'm an investor and I want to put funding into a space startup, I also want to have some predictability in terms of how my investment is going to get treated. So, for example, if I put all my money in and somehow the startup is able to secure spectrum for the satellite mission, but tomorrow the Supreme Court comes back and says there's some mischief in the allocation of spectrum, so I'm going to cancel the spectrum allocated, then my entire investment goes down the drain. So that has been a traditional problem with our country as well, because even whether with the ISRO Antrix Devas deal or whether it was a 2G spectrum case, because there is such lack of internal clarity and consensus among the various stakeholders, sometimes you end up getting into this crossfire between different departments, so that investors know that there is a level of predictability and clarity in the policy around space, which then gives the confidence to really put their money in, because then it's only a question of the business model and the technology. If both of them work, then regulations is not your problem statement. So hopefully that is the missing part of the puzzle that InSPACe will be able to address.
That seems like a long process to just get a satellite into space. Like we
It
don't
is.
really think of all that, and it's crazy.
Right. So, I mean, there's also a reason why it is so heavily regulated, right? If you look at the international legal regime, all space activities are governed by what is called as the Outer Space Treaty. Now, under the Outer Space Treaty, the country takes responsibility for the actions of its non-state actors. So tomorrow, if, for example, Yashas launches a satellite, technically it's India's responsibility to make sure that the satellite is going to the right place, does not cause any debris, does not end up adversely violating any of the international legal obligations. Now, in addition to all of that, there's also a security context, right? Because especially with emerging threats of cybersecurity against satellites, and we are in a very peculiar place where on all sides of the border there are mischievous neighbors that we have to work with. So in those circumstances, the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Home Affairs obviously have a very legitimate say in what we do in terms of space. But what we want is to be able to give those concerns a proper policy shape, so that I know what I can do to ensure that I don't end up rubbing any of the regulators the wrong way. And my mission is designed in such a way that I know the defense guys and the home ministry guys, everybody's just going to come back and say, okay, go ahead, right? You have addressed all your concerns. Now I don't even know what those concerns are. So that is the difficulty that InSPACe really needs to address.
In terms of investment, I think you were also talking to Ashok. When he was explaining the different stages, I would like to just tell you that for each of these stages, investors would all these days have questions as to how the company would solve that problem. I go out for investment. First thing that I had to do is explain investors about the space industries. All these days there were no private companies in India which had taken investment, right? Especially companies building their own products. So we had to go out and explain there is one area like this. So for some investor who is investing in something very tangible, say you invest in an e-commerce or a software company, you know what you're investing in. You can see the products. You can see where your money is going into. If you're saying your money is going into supply chain development, into salaries, all that you can see. In our case, we are going to say like 60 to 70% of the money invested goes into R&D. They really can't measure it. So apart from all those challenges, at the end, where we used to really get stuck is investors would have cold feet when they learn about policy. They used to start asking us, there are 5 to 6 levels in policy where you need to get approvals, and there are no rules or regulations in the government at the moment. So I am going to invest, say, $5 million in your company. You're going to build the entire product. At the end, there is no regulation or no policy that would allow you to launch your product or use my money to generate revenue. That is, at that point, most of the investors would break out of the teeth. So this has been our experience for close to 2 years before we also raised funding. So I think that major question is being solved now with InSPACe. And that definitely is going to open up a plethora of opportunities now. I think many companies are going to come up in India. So I think whatever innovative companies we are seeing in the Silicon Valley right now, I think India will be the next Silicon Valley for space, and maybe I think we are going to see success because the cost of implementing these technologies and getting successful missions done here in India is going to be much lesser than what we see in the US. So I think we have a very bright future.
Now that InSPACe is, finally been like formed and launched, kind of, um, does that give you, Bellatrix, and even you and your co-founders, like, does that make you all want to dream a little bigger? Make you all maybe touch the moons and stars, literally speaking, actually, in your case. Um, so how does that affect you guys?
Well, definitely, I think it's a great and welcoming thing because all these days there was nothing, and now suddenly government is so fast in bringing about a very big policy. It's not a small thing. As Ashok explained, there were complications at every single level that he explained. And now I think from what the finance minister and then the ISRO chairman have been talking during their webinars and sessions, it looks like they have understood all the problems. So if they understand the problems and they're saying they're going to solve it, we truly believe that the government has a plan for it. And if they're also moving things quite quickly now, I feel it is going to come up very quickly. And with this probably opening up InSPACe, most of the question marks and boundaries that we had all these days on what we can work on and what we can't, now I think that would be opened up. Because Chairman ISRO also mentioned in one of the interviews, even before InSPACe is formed, if any private company wants to use some of their facilities or want to launch something to space, they can directly write to ISRO at the moment, and that would be like a makeshift arrangement. Right? I think that welcoming move is something that we are really happy about.
In space, like they are going to be working on rockets and satellites and other kind of services. Will that be will that affect affect normal people like us? Will we see any benefits from that?
It's not going to be direct benefits, but indirectly, India as a country will have a lot of benefits. You just look at it in terms of employment generation and economic impact, right? These two are the main areas that we have to look at. Currently, I think it is not very easy for anybody to get a job in ISRO. There are, I think, few thousands of engineers working in ISRO. Apart from that, few in DRDO are working on space technologies, and few companies which are working on manufacturing companies. But when it comes to design of space systems, currently there are not many jobs in India, and the ones in ISRO are not that easy to get. So consider there would be about 50 to 100 space tech private companies which are going to start building their own satellites and launch vehicles. 50 to 100 is something to start with because we already have more than 25, 30 companies already. Space is one area where it is intellectual activity. More knowledge and IP is created within the country, and India will have more technology for its goal of Atmanirbhar Bharat. I think this is how it will percolate to the common man. Gradually, if India's academia also starts introducing more space-related courses, I think we will be getting more jobs here. Leaving jobs aside, probably in terms of economics, this is going to be a $1.5 to $2 trillion industry by 2040, the space industry. And if India takes up at least 10% of the share, that is going to be a huge addition to our economy. So whatever India is looking at 5 trillion economy, I think space would also have a major impact. At least maybe after 5 trillion, if we are looking at a 15 trillion economy, I think that is where space will play a major role there.
Ashok, we've also seen over the past decade or so that, despite a lot of exciting space missions that the ISRO has been working on, there's not been that much of public engagement or communication as to, okay, they don't do social media that well. It's hard for, people. Media can only do so much to kind of bridge the gap between the amazing work that they're doing and the curiosity of the public about these missions. Do you think the influx of new space companies might maybe make it more transparent, more engaging for the public to actually stay tuned to what's happening in space?
That's a good question. See, I mean, I can only speculate as to what might have been the motivation for that shroud of secrecy around some of these missions. But we also have to understand that the context of space situational awareness in the last 10 years has really changed a lot. Look, I mean, 30 or 40 years back, when the international space law was probably at the saturation level of its evolution, there was not really a private space industry that the countries had contemplated. So that's why if you look at international space laws, a lot of emerging issues around the commercialization of space is not properly addressed in any of the treaties or in any of the conventions. We're still relying upon an outer space treaty to help address some of the emerging problems. But with the emergence of anti-satellite testing, countries announcing that they want to colonize and mine outer space objects. So what has now also started to emerge is a sense of mutual paranoia and a huge security problem in space activities. So in a situation like that, I mean, it's anybody's guess if there's a race to colonize Mars, and if everybody is looking to get there, India, China, US, Russia, the UAE, and a whole bunch of other people. In today's climate, I think you can't really fault a little bit of secrecy and confidentiality around the mission statement, because you want to try and maintain your strategic advantages and do not give any information that could aid in any kind of cyber attacks, blinding efforts, kinetic attacks. So I would assume that security must have been the primary motivating factor for ISRO to maintain its shadow secrecy.
Yeah.
And in terms of the transparency going forward, we will again have to segregate space activities into two categories: missions with purely commercial context and missions with both state and commercial context, and probably a third category which is missions which are purely state interest oriented. So if it is a purely commercial, space mission or a dual use space mission, there is going to be a lot of transparency around it going forward. Simply because the best way to ensure that there is no, international concerns around satellite mission is by clarifying to the world that look, this is purely a commercial mission. There's nothing to worry about. But in terms of the satellites and the missions that are geared to advance state interests and defense interests, I would assume that even going forward, the shroud of secrecy would probably continue, and for good reason. As I said, we're not in the best place geopolitically speaking.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do see transparency happening for commercial, but not. I don't think it will change insofar as the non-commercial state-driven missions are concerned. There's a definite case for greater international cooperation and information sharing, because when an object is as far away from planet Earth as it is, you want to be able to access every resource and every network possible to be able to address any contingencies.
Yeah.
But that being said, the present day problem around space activities, which also kind of makes the sense of paranoia a little more astute, is that today we don't have a lot of clarity on what, for example, what is a weapon in space, right? Is it a piece of debris that's 20 centimeters or longer, going at an incredibly high velocity? Is it a satellite that is behaving rather strangely in space? Or is it like one of those things you see on Star Wars where there's a laser that's going to fire out of it, right? So there's no international legal consensus among countries as to what is a dangerous space activity and what is a security sensitive space activity versus what is not. So, in a situation and context where people are as unwilling to share information and as unwilling to cooperate on critical areas, it's very
Yeah.
difficult to expect a country to become more transparent.
Probably ISRO also has been trying to do its own outreach activities, but especially for missions like Chandrayaan, they're trying to be little careful because I think even we have seen this with the media. I should not be telling this in front of media, but still sometimes somebody tries to convey something and it becomes Chinese whisper. So somebody says something and it is written in a very different language. Maybe a few more courses on space would help people's general understanding about space, and they could understand ISRO's efforts also more. And not just ISRO, now it will be all of space industry.
Also, I think just to add further to that, the one of the most interesting features of the ISRO and the Indian Space Program is that the legal, the PR, and a whole bunch of other functions around space activities which are non-technical in nature are still being done by the technical people. So today, of India's
Yeah.
foremost space law experts are actually scientists. So I think it's a credit to the diversity of the people within ISRO that they've been able to do multiple functions within the ISRO itself. But perhaps maybe the time has now evolved where you want to get in people who are able to kind of handle the PR element around the mission better. Legal experts who can ensure that there is no repeat of the Antrix Devas problem. So I think
Yeah.
the case for specialization is much more now than it was.
So Elon Musk is basically the face of private players right now, and he's doing a lot of great stuff, and especially with the whole space tourist. And India's, I mean, for India to go to even send an astronaut to space, it's going to be a couple of years, maybe like 2 years or something. But now with InSPACe, with this consortium that has finally happened, does that put like a pressure, like unfair pressure on private players in India to kind of emulate the same thing that Elon Musk is doing, or maybe even Jeff Bezos is doing? Like, is that fair to you guys when you're just starting off, um, to expect the same from your?
What I personally feel is that yes, there will be a bit of pressure, probably from investors' side, where they try to look at numbers and they look at the top lines and revenues, right? Compare probably our revenues with some companies which are already there in the business for 10 to 20 years. with that in mind, I think being able to like directly take on very big companies like SpaceX right from the beginning, that would be a overkill for a startup. I think one should also understand the conditions under which SpaceX became what it is today. Back then, I think there was the United Launch Alliance, which was the primary partner for NASA for all the satellite launches. And after that, I think they were looking at different options, and then SpaceX was very close to achieving this target. And all this had happened also because Elon was able to invest around $100 million of his own money into the company and fuel his rocket launches. Something like that happening in India out of private investors' money, that would be quite a long shot. Maybe if a very big group tries to venture the game and they want to replicate the same thing, it is very much possible. I'm not saying another Elon Musk is not possible, but unless a very big group comes up and puts so much money, push, and interest into this game, it would be quite difficult. But at the same time, I would not like to say that we should do something exactly as Elon Musk did. Right? Elon Musk never did what other people in the industry did. So
Yeah.
we can't just replicate him now. We have to more scientifically look at where the market gap currently is. Probably if the launch prices in the industry are X and there is a possibility to do something at 75% of X, we have to look at what needs to be done there and how to bridge the gap. It may be smaller steps at a time, but I think finding out the right gap and building a more sustainable solution there, that is what I think Indian companies should focus on. Always been known for our frugal innovation, and I think we have to be frugal here.
Globally, Ashok, one last thing, it would be interesting to hear what some of the unlikely scenarios are that space law is planning for now. That, there's a lot of the space industry world over is evolving very fast, and there's a lot of things that people are having to consider. So what are some of the wackier or cooler things that are being thunk about by space lawyers? Like, are we planning for space wars? Are we planning, what would happen if we do encounter the first aliens and some shots are fired? give us the goss.
I mean, that has, so especially on the subject of space security, I mean, I have a couple of my friends, Daniel Porras from the Secure World Foundation, Victoria again from Secure World Foundation, Dr. Rajeshwari from ORF. So I think they're doing some really interesting and cool work on anti-satellite weapons testing, conflict in space, non-weaponization of space. So there has been an interesting couple of developments on that front. But I think for people who really want to understand some of the more interesting developments that are really out there, so there was an Israeli mission to the moon that happened to carry microorganisms called tardigrades. And this was concealed from the international community. So it was essentially a case of stowaways on a mission to the moon. And only after the tardigrades landed on the moon did the Israelis actually come back and declare that we have actually sent microorganisms into space. So that actually threw open a whole bunch of questions on, are we allowed to, for example, terraform Mars to make it more habitable for humans? Or would that violate the duty not to contaminate an outer space object like, say, Mars or an asteroid? So I think in fact, the very same time, Daniel Porras did a series of articles with two other co-authors on the legality of carrying tardigrades into the moon. So you can actually, it's called The Curious Case of Transgressing Tardigrades. A very interesting series of articles on the legality of carrying stowaways into different planets. Yeah, there are some cool things happening, but deep space is still, I mean, it's not really emerged into the consciousness of lawmakers yet. Because in terms of the priority for policy making, we are more concerned about whether we have enough spectrum, enough orbital slots for our satellites. Can we ensure that rival countries don't knock out our satellites during a terrestrial military conflict? So I think those concerns
are issues.
Yes.
Relatively.
Yeah, we were looking for like more dramatic stuff like murder or crime or something. I guess that's gonna be a couple of years. We're just gonna have to wait for it, I guess.
A case of an astronaut who I think committed an economic crime sitting out of space.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Anne McLean, I think.
Yeah. Yes. So there's been a fair amount of debate around that as well. So, but again, it's still not the stuff that you see in science fiction movies yet. but it's going to get there
Yeah.
later.
Yeah, I think we'll just wait for things to happen, and then maybe we'll figure out what the lawyers can do to kind of.
Yeah,
Thanks
thanks.
for
That
coming
was
on
nice.
board. We really appreciate
Not at all.
this
Pleasure,
little
Jas. Thank
chat
you
that
so much
we
for
had
having me.
here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really
it was
enjoyed
a
it.
great
Yeah.
session. Thanks.
Yeah.
We'll see you guys soon, and
Okay, I'll
hopefully
just
we'll
wrap
have
up.
another one in space, and we can, speak about this some more, or something else completely different, cooler. Yeah,
By then, this will be the next Elon Musk of India. So we're keeping our fingers crossed.
yeah,
Come on.
definitely.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Take care. Okay.
Thank you. See you.
Take
Okay.
care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
So this is it for this week's podcast. Do join us next time where we'll be talking about whether our societies need to be built differently to deal with climate change and to make it pandemic proof. Thank
Yeah.
you.